David Lam, how are you?
What's going on, Mike?
Happy Friday. Appreciate you joining me.
Not a problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. So, today, what I want to talk with you about today is an experience that you had about with door knocking. And I know that it was your first time. And so, before we jump into this experience and what you've learned from it, can you give me a little bit of background on your experience in real estate, what you're currently doing, and then we'll dive into the rest of it.
Yeah. Essentially, I got started in real estate because I watched some videos on YouTube. I'm pretty sure everybody has also. I think well, actually, no, before that, it was Russ Whitney. If you know who Russ Whitney is, way back in the day, that kind of was the seed that was planted in my brain about real estate probably, oh God, like 20 years ago now. And I bought a set of tapes from that long ago, and I just never watched them and took action on it. Um, and then I discovered Brent Daniels on TTP, joined TTP, and then I did a few wholesale deals, and of course I discovered the great Prince Morby, and then decided to join Sub 2. And then I was fortunate enough to join Mike here and Don on their journey in creative finance. So it's allowed me to explore a lot of different avenues of the real estate investment side. And I've been an entrepreneur for the last 20 years of my life. I ran a martial arts school, and um, I, I understand how to run a business. I understand how to connect with people I did it with thousands of arts. And so I thought real estate was a great step for myself just to people.
What do you think you learned from your martial arts management experience that actually translates into your real estate experience?
My ability to connect with people, because when you teach kids, you have to be very quick on your feet, literally, because when you work with a room of 3 and 5-year-olds, um, 4, when they're that young, you have those, and you have to be able to react to them. So you have to wear so many different hats and be so many different characters when you're teaching those people or teaching those kids, that if you could teach anybody that's at 3 to 6 years old, you can teach anything to anybody. So my unique ability to connect with those kids kind of transferred over to people nowadays, because some people are still kind of like kids, to be honest with you.
So tell me a little bit more about what you're currently doing, because I know that this door knocking experience was a first time for you. So what were you doing before your door knocking experience? And then, of course, I want to get into why you started door knocking.
Yeah, so I was doing acquisitions for a while. Then I made a pivot into the dispo side. We discovered there was kind of a hole in the business a little bit. There's a lot of people doing it, but not as many people that are acquiring the deals. There's not people selling deals. So we connect with wholesalers on a daily basis to see if we can help them sell their deals or dispo their deals. Because if you've ever experienced that before, acquisitions is already significantly hard enough. And if you use all your energy to do acquisitions, you don't have enough energy for dispositions. So we want to try to help as many wholesalers as much as possible on the disposition side of things, so they can really focus on what they're great at.
So let's dive into that just a little bit, because I think that's really important. That hole that you identified, can you explain exactly what that hole is in more detail?
I find it really depends on the person and what I prefer. B2B conversations instead of B2C, so business to business instead of business to customer. And when you're dealing with the customer and they're trying to sell their house, we'll dive into that in my door knocking experience a little bit. But I find I have better business to business conversations a lot quicker, just because if the deal's already signed, I just have to start negotiating back and forth. And those conversations flow a lot easier than trying to sign a contract. But also, if somebody's new to wholesaling, they don't realize, like, everybody teaches you a lot about acquisitions. A lot of it's done, everything on YouTube. A lot of mentorships are all about acquisitions, and they tell you, like, hey, just create a buyer's list and tell them you're selling something, and you can create a buyer's list that way, right? Email blasting is not a way to do it, and they say the key is in the follow-up, right? And when you're disposing the deals, you have to follow up constantly and consistently. And the amount of calls you have to make on the disposition side is just as much, if not more, than the acquisition side. So there's no way that one human being can do both and swing both sides of that sword, essentially. I lost you, Mike. Oh no, my headset died. Mike, I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
It's my fault. It was my fault. I muted myself accidentally.
That was such a great question that I couldn't hear it.
Yeah. No, that was my fault. One thing that I just said was that I think a lot of people think that they're simply going to send an email to people, right, about a deal that they have and that deal's going to sell. And it could work. But I think that to the point that you made about the constant follow-up is super, super important. You have to make sure that you follow up and you're properly communicating the deal. The other issue that I see a lot of, and I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but a lot of people will post a deal on Facebook and they'll look for buyers that way. And what I found doing that is that most of the people who are reaching out to me are wholesalers, right? Trying to resell the deal to their buyers list. And so it's a lot of wasted time talking to wholesalers as opposed to the person who's ultimately going to be making the decision to buy it.
Correct. And what we try to do, we do try to avoid like any sort of like super long daisy chains, right? Like we try to be with the person that's direct to seller, if not one layer away from that, depending on the size of the deal. But a lot of people get these deals that are relatively like, they're not in that price bracket where you can daisy chain these sorts of things. There's just not enough space. And then I also do find like a lot of people are just kind of uneducated. I can tell who's graduated from YouTube University and who had like a mentor that they can kind of follow when it comes to submitting deals. Because I get a lot of those deals that I just say like, hey, this is not going to move, and I give them some feedback on it. And I give more feedback on deals than I do post deals.
Yep.
So it's so this is a whole other. It's like essentially a whole brand new business on the disposition side of things for us.
And education, right? Because you're spending a lot of time educating the wholesalers on how to properly underwrite. Because what you're doing is you're actually talking to people who are buying and they're telling you, well, look, this is way too expensive. And then you're taking that experience and you're putting that on the deal that you have in front of you going, look, based on what I know from the people who are buying right now, this doesn't work.
Yep. Like there's no space. Like as an example, I just got one the other day. I think the price point, the ARV was 100 and maybe 200,000, and the wholesaler is trying to get $20,000 out of it. I'm just like, where is there space for this, guys? Like the numbers have to make sense. Then I think and the problem is people think a lot about themselves and not about the end buyer. They have to think about the whole journey of where this house is going to go, and when they think of everything like the first piece of it, not the last 10. It's a little frustrating because they don't put that in consideration when they run their numbers.
I think that's a really good transition into the door knocking, right? Because I think that a lot of people who get into door knocking, and we'll talk about this, the mindset of it a little bit here, but a lot of people get into door knocking to benefit themselves, right? They want to make money off of the deal that they have in front of them, but there's more to door knocking than just buying or selling a deal. So I'm kind of curious to dive into that a little bit with you. So what motivated you to start to door knock?
Kind of been jumping into something called the Daily Dial on Insta too. It's like a morning time for people to kind of practice their calling skills or just do some role play. And a lot of people have been talking a lot about a pre-foreclosure, so it's been kind of echoing in my head a little bit. And I knew that this is something new for me to try, and it's very uncomfortable. It was extremely uncomfortable for me. Like,
Not even just a little.
Yeah, it was extremely uncomfortable. Just my nerves of driving to meet up with my friend Mark to do it. I'm happy I did it with somebody that has experience doing it. So that definitely helped in regards to like a coaching aspect of it to make you feel a little bit more comfortable. But he also like kicked me out the car. He was like, "Hey, it's your turn. Let's go." And I think if I didn't have that person to tell me to do it, maybe I'll drive by the house and just be, yeah, looks like it's in pre-foreclosure, and just keep driving, right? So that gentle kick in the butt was kind of nice, but it's also nice to do it with somebody because you can get a little boost of confidence in yourself to actually go try something.
One thing that I think that people who know about you is, and people who are listening are going to pick up on it here real quick, is how high your emotional intelligence is. And so I think that you would naturally be very good at doing pre-foreclosure work, or people who are in distress situations regardless, even though you said earlier that you prefer the B2B conversation than the B2C. So you're already behind the eight ball, right? I mean, it's your first time doing door knocking. You prefer B2B instead of B2C. And so it's a nerve-wracking experience. But in terms of that first door knock, describe what it was like to be kicked out of the car and walk up to a door or a gate and knock on that door.
Luckily, Mark took the first one to kind of set the example. So I kind of knew what to follow. I'm very analysis paralysis oriented. So I could structure a phone call like a champ, right? But I couldn't structure a walk into a house kind of deal. Like I was like, what do I say? What's my intro? What's my value proposition? I was thinking about a whole phone call itself, and it was very nerve-wracking in my head because I didn't know what to do. And I hate that feeling of not knowing what to do. It becomes very challenging for me because I'm a very process-oriented person, I think, because of my martial arts background. So I wanted to know the process. But Mark reminded me, it was like, David, you can solve this problem today. It's literally impossible. Like, you're just trying to get to the person. But it was so hard for me to shift the mindset because I was like, how do I help? What do I do? I got to know the answers to all of his questions. And in actuality, I just need to have a conversation with that person.
So tell me about that conversation, right? Actually, let's back up just a second. When you were going up to that door and you're doing it for the first time, tell me did you have a script or did you have a goal in mind? And then how did you implement that?
First of all, I can't see you anymore. You kind of disappeared off my screen here. I don't know if you did that on purpose.
It's because I'm focusing on your handsomeness. That's all. There we are.
Thanks. So what was that feeling like?
Yeah. First of all, did you have a script or a goal in mind that you wanted to accomplish on that first door?
I had no, I didn't have a script. I think one of the things that in my mind, like my mindset a little bit was a little bit off. I could say it because I was thinking like, ooh, I could probably find a deal today, right? Back in my head, pre-foreclosure is one of the highest motivating factors for someone to move their house. But because of that mindset, like of me trying to acquire a deal yesterday, I could feel like my questions being different, my anxiety level being a lot higher because I didn't have a script, I didn't have something to follow. Plus, I've never done this before. I felt like I was walking into a dark room, feeling around to see what I can see. Right? It was very uncomfortable when you're doing something that you've never done before, and you have nothing to follow. You have no guidelines. You think you know, but you don't know, and you're trying to find a deal, and it really influences everything that you're trying to say. And it really screwed with my head a little bit. So after that first knock, it felt like I was like, oh, okay, that's a little bit of weight off my shoulders. But the weight that I was carrying was like so unbearable for myself, and I was also aware of this unbearable weight that I was like holding in my head and going through all these scenarios in my brain of like, and I just heard a story that morning of somebody getting a gun in their face, knocking, pre-foreclosure. So that was on the back of my mind at the same time.
So the good thing for you, and you live on the beach in San Diego, and so I don't think you're gonna run into a whole lot of guns in your face. But I can imagine how stressful that would be, especially just given the fact that this is such an emotional and stressed situation for the seller that, if I were in their shoes and someone was coming up to my door saying, hey, basically you've missed payments on your house, can I help you? my first reaction would be an expletive and get off my front porch, basically, right?
Hmm.
So what did you do to get past that point where, let's say the guy opens the door, the woman opens the door, how do you start a conversation door knocking?
Because the hardest part about this, and I've realized once I kind of decompressed from the whole day, is that every time they open the door, they have their guard up. And I think automatically as human beings, when we open our door to anybody that knocks, including the Amazon guy, you're already like, heck's on my door, right? You're already automatically programmed to be in a defensive mindset when you open the door, just to make sure that you're protecting yourself and your family. This guy's been rung multiple times during the day. He's been emailed. He's been door knocked before other people. So if you want to talk about high level volatile energy coming from somebody, knock on a pre-foreclosure door, because every person that opened their door, especially a gentleman we spoke to, his name was Howard yesterday, he had that energy. Like as soon as he came out, you could feel the negativity, you could feel the pessimism coming from him. I think maybe because I have a little higher level of emotional intelligence to kind of sense these things, but once I shaved my head, I guess my spider senses started kicking off a little bit. But it was I could almost feel him being so defensive, like, "Hey, what do you want?" It's like that angry neighbor you had when you're a kid. You just never jumped on like Mr. Smith's lawn because he didn't want you to step on his grass. It was
Yep.
that guy opening the door to me yesterday, and that
It was
put me,
the old guy from Home Alone who lived next door, right?
yeah, that dude,
Yep.
right? Uh, he seems scary, looks scary, but when you actually get a chance to talk to him, it's not that bad. But to start that conversation, it like my palms. I mean, it was a sunny day here in San Diego. Luckily, the clouds went away. But it was like I could feel my palms were sweating. I was trying to be very careful with my hands. Like I was thinking my body position. I thought about all this stuff before, like what's my body language saying? Am I open? Am I approachable? I can't put my hands inside my pockets. Am I nervous? Am I like, and I have a little sling bag, and I was holding onto my sling bag. And I'm like, shit, I'm sorry, excuse my language. But I look a little nervous holding onto this thing. And I'll start to fidget with my hands when I'm nervous. So I started clicking in my bag. I was like, oh, stop clicking your bag. Put your hands here. Put your hands here. Have your hands open. And like I had to think about all that stuff because I wanted him to lower his defenses, right? And the only way you can lower someone's defenses is if you have to be very genuine in the questions you're asking, right? And you have to allow them to kind of slowly open up to you. And this is not like hey, I want to buy your house. It's like you have to come with a level of servitude that honestly is like has to be, you want to service them. Just like a waiter wants to bring you food to a table, that's what it has to be. Like you have to service them, and you have to come with the intention of, my goal today is to get to know you and see if I can help you. And then after that, and maybe it'll lead to a deal. But if you have that, like, I want to make some money today kind of breath, it's definitely going to come across in all the questions you're asking. And one thing I noticed, since I did do that, I wasn't as open to listening as I normally would be.
Interesting, because the reason that people are door knocking in our community is to get a deal,
Yep.
right? It's not like they're doing this; they're doing it out of the kindness of their heart, hopefully, to help. But at the same time, to your point, and using the waiter analogy, you could give that person the menu. They could pick what works for them. And maybe it's the one thing out of 20, for example, that does not result in a tip for you, right? So, I think that a lot of people get into this, walking into it with, I have to get a deal, I have to get a deal. And you tell me, I mean, it feels like that comes off maybe a little bit slimy or predatory.
Yeah, it's like to kind of bounce off that waiter analogy. It's like I can't force you to buy the steak because like maybe I get more money because you buy the steak and I get a bigger tip because it costs more money. But I can't keep selling you the steak if you want chicken, or if you just want an appetizer, right?
Exactly.
So it does, and like he kept through that experience, he kept calling Mark and I sharks, It's like there's so many sharks in the water, especially when your name gets put on these lists. And this Freedom of Information Act has really like it's messed me up. And now everybody knows, and it's kind of been well, first of all, their privacy has been invaded, right? And it's like something that we have to really consider. But to also go off that waiter analogy, though, like because I could sense all these things, and I always want to help. I'm a solution finder. I have to be very careful with providing um, like he was a construction worker that owned his own construction business. He specializes in like cement, and he was like, I'm a sorry, it was like an 8 something cement pour. So he knows how to do rebar. He knows how to do everything when it comes to pouring cement. And I was like, oh, maybe we can, find somebody that does fix and flips and connect you with this person to pour some cement for you so you can make some more money. Like I could start, but I didn't want to overpromise him everything because I think he's been overpromised so many things so far, and he doesn't even know me yet. Right. So if I start coming up with too many solutions to, solve all of his problems, how am I any different? Like my goal is to get to know this person and see if I can help and see if he wants to be helped at the same time. And then like the next time, if we ever talk again, which we're going to follow up with him, but it's like the next time, will the conversation go different? Or if you set an appointment, that's when you start showing them the whole menu, giving them all the solutions, and then helping them think outside the box once they've kind of decompressed from just getting to know you, essentially.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting because door knocking seems to become, or has seemed to become, a more popular way of generating leads as foreclosures rise, and pre-foreclosures and foreclosures are a standard in our business, right? It's quote unquote low hanging fruit for lead generation. And I think that the encouragement in our community, especially, is to go and actually knock on that door as opposed to text or mail or call. And I don't think that as many people are actually going out to knock on the doors as they say they are or might be. And so I'm kind of curious. You told me something earlier that I thought was really interesting, and it had to do with the number of people who have knocked on this person's door since this whole issue has happened in his life. Can you kind of go into detail with how many people have knocked on the door in the time span that this has actually gone public for him?
Yeah, so it's been public for, I think he said 6 or 7 months. He's done some things to mitigate some of the pre-foreclosure, so he doesn't pre-foreclose on the house. So he's actually done one of the solutions I had in mind of like a loan mod. So he's done a loan mod. So he's trying to tread water to stay above water a little bit here to keep his house. So unlike other people, he's actually taken action to hopefully resolve some of this or mitigate it. But the door knocking, we had asked them, like, hey, how frequently do people come to your door and talk to you? And he says once every week. He's like, I get calls every day. I get letters in the mail all the time. People want to give me loans. People want to buy a house, and then friends come by. They're like, oh yeah, your house is worth $1 million, but I'll give you this dollar amount for like a lot less. And he's like, that's not what I want. He wants to keep his home. But he said once every few weeks. So, and he hasn't anybody like Mark and I, where we weren't an agent. We weren't like somebody, I mean, if it falls in our lap for us to sell the house, then it does as investors. But if you come with that approach of just trying to see if he's come up with some sort of solutions for himself to help him keep the house, because some people just give up and they want to sell it, right? And there's those people. He was a gentleman fighting for his house. He was a former military person, and he was like, I don't know how to give up. So, for people like that, that's going to be like a long nurture kind of relationship that whenever he's ready, or if he ends up, if we end up becoming like friends or whatever, then we come up. But it just shows like people don't have the nerve to approach the person physically, but they hide behind the phone to call them on a daily basis, which I'm guilty of too. And it makes the phone is like a facade you can put on, be anybody you want, but you have to be yourself in front of other people.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's easy to hide behind a phone. or a CRM that's going to text somebody and hope that someone responds. And I think that what's really not understood here is the long-term benefit from you actually going to meet that person live and in person, right? And whether this house is something that you can buy or profit off of, that almost shouldn't be the point, right? The point should be, hey, let's see how we can help this person. And in that person's worst case scenario, it's really, let's see if we can buy the house. That's the worst case scenario for him and probably best for you. But let's say for a second that you don't buy the house, but you treat this person with respect and dignity, and you build a good relationship with him. You're going to get something out of that eventually, that relationship, right? Whether it's a friendship or whether it's a referral or something along those lines. But I think what's forgotten a lot of the time is doing good to kind of put good out there in the world, and hopefully good things come back to you.
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in that, and it never has to come directly from that person, right? It's like if you give out positive energy, the positive energy will be reciprocated to you in some other form or fashion. You just have to be vigilant and aware of when you actually receive that, instead of just saying like, "Hey, Mike, I paid you $5. You gotta give me $5 back," right?
Right.
It's more like, "Hey, I gave you $5. Somebody else will give me $20 later when I need it."
Yep. Yeah, I love
So
that.
it's but one thing I also remember from our conversation was a lot of these people are like in pain, right? Like their private, like I mentioned earlier, their privacy is being invaded. They're defensive already. They're and yesterday Howard almost broke down multiple times just telling his story. Like I knew what's been happening to him since like '03. And we were out there for 45 minutes. He just kept talking. And there were moments where he would pause, and then he got into this conversation. And just sometimes one of the biggest things you can do door knocking is just lend an ear, because they're so defensive that they're internalizing all this like negativity that they're experiencing, and nobody's really listening to them, and they have a hard time asking for help, and that's why they're in their such a current situation. So he literally broke down multiple times, and it was really hard for me, because I could sense it. I wanted to I consoled him, but I also did want to. I have to remember this is like a business relationship, right? It's not like a friendship that we're trying to gain here, unless maybe one day he'll pour concrete for me or something like that. But I had to keep that in the back of my head. I had to remember, hey, this is a business conversation, kind of like going back to that waiter. The waiter's here to serve you, bring you food, find a solution, clean your table, and then and you give him a tip afterwards. Like I have to be like the waiter. Like I want to help you. I want to serve you. But at the end of the day, like we're friends, and it's really hard not to become super friendly with these people and console them and draw that line in the sand of how far you want to go, how far you want to reach with them, because you have a lot of empathy for them. And when you have that level of empathy, it's really hard not to want to give them a solution for every single thing they have a problem with.
And I know that that's naturally your issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you do want to help people so badly. Um, I think though too, I think the way that you handle yourself, and I think that the way that you probably connect with people allows him a safe place to break down and to let his emotions out, right? If you weren't that type of person, I don't think that he would have done that. And so, how exactly do you think that you balance that line between I'm here to help and I want to lend an ear to listen, and at the same time, how can I, from a business perspective, move you along the path that's best for you? So how do you kind of separate that, right? The emotional, it's almost like emotional detachment to some degree.
Luckily yesterday, like Mark was there to we were kind of bouncing back and forth with her. So he would ask some questions. I was like, oh, I don't know if I would have asked it that way, like, or maybe I would have asked it this way, or maybe I would have asked this question, right? Just like I would have probed a little bit more into the why.
Yeah.
I enjoy getting those types of conversations, but I also have to realize like I have to be very careful about, especially the first conversation, right? Like you want them to open up to you. And I think even at the end of the conversation, Mark was Howard was like, "But why are you guys here?" Like after he talked to us for 40 minutes, he was like, "But you guys are just sharks." And he just kept labeling me as a shark, right? I'm like, in my head, I'm like, am I a shark? Am I coming across as a shark? Like, uh, do I are the questions I'm asking, or is my giving off the fact that I want to buy his house? And maybe it was, or maybe it wasn't. But he was willing to at least have extended conversation out with us, and like we thanked him for his time. But it was hard to not want to dive deeper. Like, oh, so why do you feel like we're sharks? Like I wanted to ask him that, right? Have we come across that way? I'm not an agent. I'm not trying to like. I'm not buy your house. If it ends up being like that, like you just have to really navigate the conversations, because at the end of the day, we're business people, right? And when it comes to business, there's something financial in this whole conversation. Like that's the
Sure.
elephant in the room, right?
Sure.
And it's like someone's gonna make money or someone's gonna lose money or someone's gonna lose their house, or what it might be, but there's gonna be something there that's financial gain or loss, and it's
So you're
challenging.
you're a very introspective person. So I bet you spent the last 12 to 16 hours thinking about these interactions. What do you think you could have done a little bit differently to maybe not come off as sharky? Or do you think that you were coming off as sharky? Or do you think that was just the people previous to you who came off and then he was applying that characteristic to you because you were physically in the same spot that they were before?
I think when you get those, when you see it's kind of like when your phone rings for your car warranty.
Mhm.
Um, when you see those odd numbers, you just don't want to pick it up. You're just, oh my God, it's another car warranty person, right? It's the same kind of mentality for people knocking on the door, like the same sort of association. Crap, somebody's here knocking on my door again. They just want to buy my house. All right, this is going on. But I think if we weren't as open and how we started off the conversation, I don't think he would talk to anybody else for that long. Like he
Right.
told us about like his business before, some other things that he went through, his whole family life, and we're just like, I was like, this is a lot of information. But when I think about it, I'm like, man, he just needed somebody to talk to. And in retrospect of me thinking back about this conversation, like I really needed to change my mindset. Like my mindset was completely off. One, because I was super nervous. Two, I was super just knocking on these doors, right? And just like when you're in that mode, you can't think calmly, and it's really hard for you to hear. Like introspectively listen to somebody. I was paying attention to my body language, like how I was feeling a little anxious. Like I feel my heart rate started going up. I feel when it was kind of slowing down. When he kept calling me shark, I was like, I'm not a shark, but I am a shark. But I'm not a shark, but I am a shark. Like I'm not a great white shark, but maybe I'm a nurse shark that kind of still eats the chum that falls to the ground. But in a way, it was almost like imposter syndrome, right? Like, hey, I'm not a shark. What are you talking about? But not to get defensive when you called you that, right? And to take these comments these people might give you initially, they might fire at you. They might call you, might drop some f bombs at you, might call you an a-hole, whatever it is. It's gonna happen, right? Like you're the car warranty person. They just hang up on you, and you can't take things personally because one, if you take it personally from a stranger, then you got to deal with yourself a little bit, right?
Mhm.
And I had to keep reminding myself, like he called me a shark, but hey, I don't know this guy, and he don't know me. He can call me whatever he wants. He has the full right to do that, because you know what we don't know is we don't know each other yet. And my goal today is him not to call me a shark the next time he sees me. And that should be my mindset behind that conversation. Was if I come in with the place service and not feeling like a shark or being offended by anything he says, and just have a normal conversation. It's like someone calling your shirt ugly and taking so much offense to that. But like, hey, you don't know me, right? That shouldn't really be of concern for me if you think my shirt's ugly if I don't know you.
So with respect to that, let's say someone comes off as attacking, right? Calling you a shark, you feel yourself getting defensive. What did you do in that situation so you don't come off as defensive to him or combative?
Some subtle reminders of why we're there, right? Like you have to think of a way to bring their guard down. Like, hey, what sets you up? What makes you any different than the last person knocked on the door, or the person that called them 2 hours ago, or the person that sent the email that morning? Like, what is it about you that sets yourself apart? And if it's when they start attacking like that, like, hey, I'm looking to help. But also, like, we drove like our car was the same as his car. It's the same exact model and make. So like, are you guys a bunch of people that buy houses? Like, go look at the car. We're driving like this hybrid Honda Civic from like 2006. Right? We're not rolling in the money here. And we also came from a place of like, hey, my employer sent me here. So it was like we were the employees going to check the house. So
Just doing what you were told.
yeah, we were tasked to do what we're doing today, which was
Yep.
another framework to kind of bring his guard down a little bit. Like, hey, these guys they were just doing a job, right? And if we're here to do a job, like maybe not your favorite job to be a book collector or whatever it might be, but it's your job to do. So that allows you to factor in that human being factor of connecting with somebody. That if this is like a task-driven thing, then or if it's a told by your employer to do it, then you're gonna have to follow directions.
So for someone who is brand new to door knocking and looking to get their first deal, or just even trying to get themselves to push themselves to get to the point of knocking on a door, what advice can you give them?
I'm gonna give you a working out analogy here, right? Yesterday I felt like I picked up just the barbell and it felt like it weighed 3 tons, right? But with each and every time I got to a different door, and after that conversation with Howard, it made me a little bit more confident, which means like, hey, I picked it up a little bit, and with Howard, I picked it all the way up and just put it back down, right? So I was able to pick it up and put it back down. I still had so much to learn. It's still really heavy. So it's just like exercise. Like it get easier and better with more reps. That's why, like, as uncomfortable as that was, like I kind of want to do it again. But now I'm like, oh, should I bring my kid with me because maybe my kid could give me like a little barrier of entry. They'll be a little bit nicer to me because my kid's here. And I've heard plenty of people knock with like their infant kids in the carrier door. Or I would do it with a female because people aren't as combative with females. But when you have two guys, two bald Asian men coming to your door, it's a little intimidating. But when you have like, you have to think about those certain things about just how you're approaching them and what you want to do. I think the biggest thing is just go do it and just be aware of how you feel, because the way you feel on that first door, it's not as bad on the second one. And once you actually have a conversation with somebody, it's like a bigger burden lifted off your shoulders. But it's just like picking up the phone. You get nervous on that first dial and then you get more comfortable with it. And it's the same exact thing. You knock on that first door, you knock on the second door, and then you kind of be like, oh, person. And you can feel good about knocking on the next door because you know what your intention is. And as long as your intention is help them, it'll impact everything you say and everything you ask. And that's why when I say, like, I was thinking like, oh, I could buy this guy's house, I could find a deal today. That was my intention when I first got in the car. It impacted how I felt. It impacted my questions I was asking. It impacted my energy. So I really had to really shift what my intentions were. And that's what I definitely will do before the next time I go, is really have your intentions on the right mark. So it impact everything that you're trying to do, because if you genuinely, people don't care what you have to say unless they know you care, right? So if I genuinely come across as genuine and I care, and people can sense that, people can read that, and you can't work with everybody, guys. That's like the one thing is like, you can't get along with everybody, just like you can't like get along in this world. It's the same thing when you open the door. So just that in mind.
And I think that's a great point, because I think it applies not just to door knocking, right? It applies to anybody, as far as our real estate space goes, anybody who's in some form of distress, financial distress, emotional distress, whatever that is. I think that if we're able to help them first and foremost, that's going to put us in a much better position to maybe make a dollar off that deal. And at the same time, just put goodness out there, right? So if the intention seems to be one where it's, I want to make all the money in the world, compared to all I want to do is help and see how I can possibly, position this seller to be in a better spot tomorrow than they were today before they met me.
Yeah. I think the intention should be like, how can I connect with this person that's on the other line on the phone? Or how can I connect with this person if it's in person? Like, your goal is to connect, right? And if I can connect with that person, then I want to do business. Like, you don't do business with strangers off the street. Like, and if your intention is to connect with people, that's how business relationships are created, if you guys think about it from the root of it. So when you think of pre-foreclosures, or you think of cold calling, or you think of calling agents or calling sellers, like, your intention is to connect with that human being first. And if you have that intention on your first call, and not like, I gotta close a deal, I gotta close a deal, it can go a really long way in how you can carry yourself, and how more people can connect with you, because you don't reek of, commission breath, or I want your house breath, and that comes across, especially for pre-foreclosure. They can read that all day. But we didn't talk about any numbers yesterday. There's no numbers thrown out. He just told us his mortgage balance and some credit card he owed, but we never threw out a purchase price. We never threw out anything like that. We just had a conversation with the guy. Like, you have to connect with that person, just to connect with those agents, because if they feel like you just want to grab this deal because everybody does already, right? This is how you set yourself apart. It's like, genuinely connect with that person, and then once you connect with them, that's when business is started. You can't start business without shaking hands first.
100%. So at this point, how are you planning to follow up with Howard or anyone else that you spoke with yesterday?
Just be consistent. I'm hopping onto, I've been trying not to do this, hopping onto YouTube University and trying to learn more about pre-foreclosures, just so I have the knowledge in my head. And then once I run into a bigger problem, I'll reach out to people that know a lot better than I do. There's plenty of people in the sub community that just focus on pre-foreclosure. So if I run into those issues, it's like, you just JV with those people that know what they're doing, right? Like, don't try to, I'm not going to try to figure this out on my own. I'm just going to connect with people that I know that can get me over these hurdles a lot smoother than I could. Because if you start talking out of your butt and just coming up with all these scenarios and all these solutions of, this is what we can do, this is what we can do, this is what we can do, and then you can do it, like, you want to be a man of your word. And the only way you build trust with somebody in a predicament pre-foreclosure is make sure you have the correct facts. You have to understand the process, in which I'm still learning. So I just need to connect with people that do know this thing, and work with them, because you'll learn a lot quicker by actually physically doing it, experiencing it, than you could watching any type of YouTube video that somebody might post or something like that.
And don't discount your experience either, David, right? I mean, you have done foreclosures, you've done deals before, you've done sub-2 and creative deals. So even though you haven't gotten a deal from door knocking yet, and it sounds like you will very soon, maybe even with Howard, which would be super cool. And if that's the case, by the way, actually, regardless, I'm going to want to do a follow-up in about 30 days to see where you're at with your door knocking. But people should want to work with you, even because you have already done that and you're going to do it more. And so, having said that, how can people reach out to you? How can they work with you?
You can reach out to me on Facebook. There's probably a lot of David Lam there. Or you can follow me on Instagram, which I'll make public for everybody just to kind of follow me. It's LAM_Instagram. I'm going to change this thing to make it a lot easier for everybody to go to. Like, I have Mike Jackson stuff too, or whoever else. I might make it my full name. I haven't figured out how to do that. Oh, I haven't figured out what I'll do, not how, but what. A couple. Thanks for doing this live too, by the way.
I forced you to do it. I know that.
Yeah,
but...
I know. Okay. It's okay. But the thing is, like, I think one thing I've realized yesterday, especially after yesterday's experience, was don't tell yourself you can't or don't or won't or those cannot, would not, do not stuff. Like, take it out of your vocabulary, because as soon as you start planting those seeds in your head, like negative, you're not going to want to do it or have the nerve to do it. So if you want to get really uncomfortable, find a buddy to be uncomfortable with. It definitely helps a lot, and the more reps you can get. And I think let's say I do this deal with Howard, the experience I'll get from that, the next person I talk to, I'll be so much more intelligent in regards to the conversation and how I can navigate the conversation, provide certain solutions, tell a third-party story of somebody, how we help somebody else, and just utilizing, because when you speak from experience, it becomes your truth, right? And if it's your truth, it's your experience, then there's so much more genuineness to your conversations if you can keep experiencing it and get the reps in, whether it's calling or whether it's door knocking or whatever you're trying to approach. It's the reps that make you better, not the YouTube videos or Kajabi.
And I think the reps really make a whole lot of sense too, just because you get to learn from what you've already done, right? You get to improve. But one thing that you said earlier was when the person that you were doing it with maybe asked a question in a different way than you would. And so that forces you to really think about, how can I format that question that would fit my personality and possibly even elicit a better response from the seller, whether that better response means more information or a more positive response or whatever that is. I think seeing people do it, especially if you see people do it live, then you can take that all into account and make changes to your own approach that I think would only benefit you and the seller realistically in the future, right?
Like, one huge mistake I made yesterday, I didn't tell you about this one. I knocked on somebody's door and somebody was house sitting for them. And I was like, hey, so your address came across my desk because we got a letter default. And she was like, what? And I was like, oh, I should have started with, hey, are you, Jane? Right? So, like, a couple rules that we followed yesterday was like, hey, if there's kids around or teenagers around, like, just walk away, right? Or ask them when a good time to come back would be, and make sure it's the person you're trying to reach, because I provided information to a house sitter that she probably shouldn't know, right? So guess what mistake I'm not going to make again, right? It's like, what's your intro? My intro was messed up.
Yeah.
And I learned from that huge mistake of falling on my face, and I was like, oh man, now this girl knows, like, this person's private information, and oops. And I learned from that huge mistake, and I'm never gonna make a mistake again. But it also, hey, how do I approach these people? Like, how can I have a better, more subtle approach to make sure that it's the right person and the reasoning of why I'm here, so it's not like I feel like such a shark, right? I think that's one of the biggest things. Is I'm not excited to do it again, to be honest with you, Mike. But
you will.
Yeah, I will. It's just that I'll probably have the same type of emotions, the anxiety, my palms getting sweaty. But I think the more frequent I do it, just like going back to the workout analogy, you can't get stronger by looking at the weights or watching videos on how to lift weights. You actually have to go do it. So I think door knocking is going to just gotta get another rep in that thing, so I don't feel as anxious, or I can feel more confident in doing it. Every time you give us more confidence, I think is a good way to put it.
Yeah. Well, if we haven't learned anything today, other than the fact that you just have to do it, I think that seeing your experience go through it was super valuable for people who are sitting on the sidelines, right? And people who are saying, I want to do it, I'm going to do it, but never do it. And it hopefully will push someone off their sofa or behind their someone who's behind their computer to get away from their computer and actually talk to somebody in person. So I think that's really important. One thing I took away from this conversation too, David, I don't know if you picked up on it, but I think I found a business plan where we can rent out children to door knockers. So we'll figure that out.
Countries kind of stuff, Mike. Yeah.
yeah. We'll put that together later on. But David, thanks for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thanks for your time, man. It's good to meet everybody.
Hey, everyone, reach out to David if you guys need any help with door knocking. If you guys need any help with foreclosures, he is not only a door knocker, but also getting very, very good at foreclosures. So he's going to be a top-notch guy here really soon. And then we're going to have you back, David, for a follow-up after your next one or in about a month or so.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you guys later.